Victoria and Albert were at their wits' end. It wasn't just Albert's reputation that was at stake. It was their dream. The dream that world trade could secure world peace. The prince wrote to his brother Ernst in despair.
We shall probably be defeated and have to give up the whole exhibition. You see, we do not lie on a bed of roses.
Then, with the project on the verge of collapse, help came from an unexpected source. Joseph Paxton was a farmer's son. He had started work at the age of 15 as an undergardener on the great estate of the Duke of Devonshire in the north of England. But like Brunel and Cole and so many other Victorians, Paxton had enormous self-belief and an imagination that soared beyond the limits of the Duke's plantations. His ideas for improvements caught the attention of his noble employer. They earned him rapid promotion. By the age of 40, he was manager of all the Duke's estates and an independently wealthy man with investments in bridges, railways, and gasworks. He even founded a newspaper with Charles Dickens as its editor. Paxton was the typical Victorian entrepreneur who seemed to excel at anything and everything. He knew that Prince Albert's exhibition was doomed without a building, so he turned his mind to designing one. He produced a preliminary sketch on a piece of blotting paper during a board meeting of one of his railroad companies. It was a giant greenhouse. Prince Albert and his team were delighted. A building made of glass could be assembled quickly and would do away with the need to cut down the trees in Hyde Park. The critics were felled with one stroke. In the fall of 1850, an army of 2,000 workmen descended on Hyde Park. The vast iron framework covering 19 acres of land was erected in just 9 weeks. The following week, 80 glaziers fitted 18,000 panes of glass. The critics prayed for a violent hailstorm, but it was a forlorn hope. Paxton's beautiful building won the hearts of the nation. It was opened by the Queen and Prince Albert on the 1st of May, 1851, and instantly became known as the Crystal Palace.
As far as the public is concerned, it was architecturally magical. It was such a marvelous building, it was so unlike anything that anybody had seen before, that in itself, I think, set the thing off on a marvelous passage.
For the first time, the Victorians saw their brave new world on show, with all its novelty and invention, and they were bewitched.
There was a tremendous impact. Everyone was excited to see this whole building and what was contained within inside it. Within 3 months, over 6 million people visited, and when you consider the London population at that time was just over 2 million, that shows it had a tremendous international impact.
But it was the achievements of British industry that entranced the crowds who flocked to the Crystal Palace. The Great Exhibition was Britain's show. no other country came close in the production of steam engines, machine tools, the symbols of industrial might.
You go in and you see all these wonderful gadgets, all these inventions, all this evidence of British ingenuity and of British energy. And it's an advertisement to the world which says, this is the most progressive nation in the world. Look what it's produced. Isn't this marvellous?
Even the restrained columns of the Times newspaper swelled with rapture.
Those who were so fortunate as to see it hardly knew what most to admire. Around them, amidst them, above their heads was all that was beautiful and useful in nature or in art. Above them rose a glittering arch, far more lofty and spacious than the vaults of even our noblest cathedrals. Some were reminded of that day when all ages and climes would be gathered around the throne of their Maker.
The Crystal Palace achieved all that Prince Albert had hoped for and more. It convinced millions of ordinary people that the new technology could deliver a golden future not just for the rich and privileged, but for them all. It fired an enormous sense of patriotism and pride in the monarchy. But it also provoked feelings of national supremacy, a growing conviction that with such engines of power, the British could conquer the world. After the opening ceremony, the Queen gave thanks.
God bless my dear Albert. God bless my dearest country, which has shown itself so noble. Albert's name is immortalized.
The Prince, with more restraint, commented that the day's events had been quite satisfactory. The Great Exhibition marked the dawn of a new era of free trade. But Prince Albert's vision of world peace and the brotherhood of nations would prove more elusive.
Free trade is, in a sense, a form of imperialism, insofar as if anyone tries to oppose it, then the British government will take action against them, literally at the point of a cannon.
In the decade that followed the Crystal Palace, Britain would be plunged into two great conflicts that shattered Albert's illusions and set Victoria's empire on a dangerous and bloody route towards world domination. In the course of Victoria's long reign, 16 million Britons would leave the mother country for a new life overseas. Each of them, whether they were searching for fame or fortune, love or adventure, would help to make the empire of Queen Victoria the widest and most powerful the world has ever seen.
There was the feeling that this island, though then very, very beautiful, peaceful, proud, rich, in all ways successful. Nevertheless, it was cramped, it was small, it was drizzly. And over there, you know, at the end of the shipping routes, there was somewhere warm and hot and exciting. Temple bells rang, and ships sailed over limitless seas, and soldiers fought. It was a marvelous vision for somebody growing up in this little island here.
But whatever their personal dreams and ambitions, these hopeful emigrants took with them a baggage of ideas and values, beliefs and prejudices that would spread to the further corners of the earth and soak a significant part of it in blood. Most of those leaving the mother country in the 1850s were heading for the Queen's self-governing dominions of Canada, Australia and New Zealand, or the former colonies of the United States. Others were bound for the country that Victoria would one day describe as the most precious jewel in her crown, India. India was the greatest overseas territory that any empire has ever possessed. But it had been conquered not by the British Army, but by a private trading company. The East India Company had begun with a single warehouse on the west coast of India. When its trade was threatened by European rivals or Indian rulers, the company went to war. It employed its own private army of native troops, commanded by British and European officers. They won battle after battle. With each victory, thousands of new Indian recruits came over from the ranks of their defeated opponents. They swore an oath to their new employer.
To serve the Honourable Company faithfully and truly against all their enemies, while I continue to receive their pay and eat their salt.
That oath of loyalty was the most important single strand binding the British to India, and the most vulnerable. By the time of Victoria, the East India Company, with its vast native army, controlled a swath of territory across India 10 times the size of the British Isles, and with 5 times the population. The merchant adventurers had become conquerors, and to the victors went the spoils. The hookah-smoking agents or nabobs of the East India Company became a byword for splendid living and riches beyond the dreams of their countrymen in England.
They were generally well-educated, upper-middle-class Englishmen who went out partly to make money, as they nearly always did, but also to have fun and to have excitement and to have a bit of romance and to go somewhere where the horizons were wider and the opportunities were greater and the loot was better. There was no improving intention. They weren't bigoted at all, so many of them had Indian friends. Some of them had Indian wives. A lot of them had Indian mistresses and produced many Anglo-Indian children.
The Indian mistress, or Bibi as she was known, was an important, almost official feature of company life. Traditionally, she was installed in a house known as a Bibi Gar, where she lived in some luxury with her children and servants. In its early days, the company had encouraged its white employees to take Indian wives, but the Bibi had become the approved alternative. Bibis steadied the men, it was argued, and rooted the company in Indian soil. One officer wrote wistfully of the Bibis,
They are so amusingly playful, so anxious to please a person, one shrinks from the idea of encountering the whims or yielding to the furies of an Englishwoman.
One Englishwoman in particular was not amused. The high-spirited young woman who had become Queen of England at 18 had matured into a proud and sometimes priggish wife and mother. She and Prince Albert believed in what would become known as Victorian values, in particular the sanctity of home and family and the supremacy of the Protestant religion. They were values shared by most of Victoria's British subjects, rich or poor. Despite the squalor and poverty of their own cities, the Victorians began to see themselves as God's chosen people, with a mission to spread the gospel to other lands.
All of these things come together around this period, around sort of 1815 onwards, to develop a very new attitude within Britain, a feeling that they are the face of the future, really, and a desire to impose this on others. They feel they have a duty to do this, to civilise people, and this is known as the civilising mission.